"Pretend you own me tonight," she begged. Barmaid grabbed Cowboy as outlaws surrounded her. The summer heat of 1830 made the Gilded Scorpion saloon feel like the devil's own furnace. Dust hung thick in the air as three armed men kicked open the doors, their spurs singing a death march across wooden floorboards. "Clara!" The lead outlaw's voice cracked like a whip. "Luther Kane wants his property back. Now!" The barmaid froze, glasses trembling in her hands. She'd been running for 3 months, hiding in this Arizona border town, praying the ruthless ranch owner who'd branded her like cattle would never find her. But Harlan Pike and his men had tracked her down. When Pike grabbed her arm, Clara's survival instinct screamed. Her eyes swept the smoky room, landing on a stranger in the corner, a lean cowboy with storm-grey eyes and trail dust coating his worn leather. He sat perfectly still, watching everything with the quiet intensity of a man who'd seen too much death. Clara made her choice. She tore free from Pike's grip and ran straight at the stranger, throwing herself into his lap with desperate force. Her arms locked around his neck as she pressed her lips to his ear, her whole body shaking with terror. "Pretend you own me tonight," she whispered, her voice raw and breaking. "Please, they'll kill me if you don't." The cowboy, a drifter named James Thornton, felt her heart hammering against his chest. Pike's hand dropped to his holster. The entire saloon held its breath. James's calloused hand settled on Clara's waist in a gesture of unmistakable possession. "Ladies with me," he said, his voice cold as winter stone. Pike's face went purple with rage as he drew his pistol. James Thornton didn't flinch as Pike's gun cleared leather. His own hand remained steady on Clara's trembling waist, but his eyes had gone flat and dead, the look of a man who'd already decided how this would end. "You don't know who you're crossing, stranger," Pike snarled, his 2 men fanning out behind him. "That girl belongs to Luther Kane. He's got papers, legal indenture." "I heard you," James replied, his drawl slow and deliberate. "She's with me tonight. You can come back tomorrow if she's of a mind to leave." It was an offer of peace, a way out. Pike was too stupid to take it. "She ain't got a mind. She's got Luther's brand burned into her shoulder. Now push her off, or I'll drop you where you sit." The word brand hung in the air like poison. Clara's fingers dug into James's shoulders, her breath hot against his neck. He could feel her terror, smell the fear sweat on her skin. If you're enjoying this tale of courage and survival in the Wild West, hit that like button and subscribe for more authentic frontier stories. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from our audience around the world. James looked at Pike's backup men. He calculated distances, counted heartbeats, assessed exits. Then he spoke words that would change both their lives forever. "Then you'd best draw." The silence stretched thin as razor wire. Pike's finger twitched on the trigger. Clara buried her face in James's chest, unable to watch. Somewhere, a clock ticked. Someone coughed. Then Pike's nerve broke, and he stormed out, his boots thundering across the boards. "This ain't over," he roared from the doorway. "Luther will send an army." The moment Pike vanished into the night, Clara tried to pull away. James caught her wrist gently but firmly. "Stay. They'll be watching through the windows." She nodded, her violet eyes wide with exhaustion and something else, gratitude mixed with shame. Up close, James could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 23, with fine features that spoke of better breeding than this border town dive. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Clara Brennan. I know I had no right to." "James Thornton, and you had every right to survive." He released her wrist, and she slid into the chair beside him, keeping her back to the wall. "Tell me about Luther Kane." The story poured out in halting whispers. Her parents dead of cholera, her uncle's gambling debts, the devil's bargain that sold her to Kane like livestock, the other women Kane kept locked in his ranch house, property in everything but name. "He branded me when I tried to run last winter," Clara said, her hand unconsciously moving to her left shoulder. Said runaway property needs marking. James's jaw tightened. He'd seen evil men in his 32 years, seen what greed did to souls. But this was something darker. Why run again? Why now? Clara's hand moved to her dress bodice, where something flat was hidden. Because I stole his ledger. Every girl he bought, every homesteader he swindled, every murder he ordered. It's all written there in his own hand. James leaned forward, suddenly very interested. That book could hang him. Yes, if I can get it to federal authorities at Fort Prescott. But it's 3 days' hard ride through Badlands, and Kane's men know this country. Outside, horses whinnied. Multiple riders were gathering in the darkness. They were coming back. The first bullet shattered the saloon's front window before either could move. James grabbed Clara and rolled, pulling them both behind the overturned table as gunfire erupted. 6 men, not 3, poured through the doors, Pike leading the charge. "Burn them out!" Pike roared. James's pistol barked twice, precise shots that sent 2 attackers sprawling. But the odds were impossible. He grabbed Clara's hand and yanked her toward the back storeroom, bullets chewing splinters from the doorframe behind them. "The window!" Clara gasped, pointing to a high opening used for ventilation. James boosted her up with his wounded side, screaming protest. She scrambled through, landing hard in the alley. He followed, his older frame less agile, dropping into mud and refuse, just as flames began licking at the saloon's interior. "My horse!" he yelled, already running toward the livery stable. They burst into the stable where James's bay gelding stood. His hands shook as he threw on the saddle, Clara working beside him with surprising competence, her saloon keeper hands suddenly deft and sure. Riders pounded into the alley. "There!" James couldn't mount. His wounded side betrayed him, buckling his leg. He fell against the stall, cursing. Clara's face transformed from terrified girl to determined woman. She grabbed his arm, planted her shoulder under his weight, and physically shoved him toward the saddle. "Get on!" she commanded. With her help, James hauled himself up. Before he could protest, Clara grabbed his extended arm, put her boot on his, and swung herself up behind him like she'd been born to ride double. "Ride!" she screamed, wrapping her arms around his waist. The bay exploded from the stable, scattering Pike's men. Bullets whined past their heads as they thundered into the desert darkness, leaving barren springs and any hope of a quiet night far behind. Clara clung to James's back, feeling blood seep warm through his shirt. They rode through the night until the horse stumbled, exhausted. James guided them into a dry wash, a natural trench carved by ancient floods, now just cracked earth and scattered cottonwoods. The summer stars blazed overhead, indifferent to their suffering. When James tried to dismount, he nearly fell. Clara caught him, smaller but tougher than she looked. Together, they got him down, and she saw the truth. His left side was soaked dark with blood. "You're shot," she breathed, horror flooding her voice. "Grazed. In the saloon." James's voice was tight with pain. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." She tore strips from her already ruined skirt, hands shaking. "I'm going to bind it. This will hurt." It did. James gritted his teeth as she cleaned the wound with precious water from his canteen, then wrapped it tight. Her touch was gentle despite her fear, and he noticed her hands bore the calluses of hard work, not the softness of the kept woman Pike had called her. Thank you for riding along with us on this dangerous journey. If you're invested in James and Clara's survival, show your support with a like and subscribe to our channel for more authentic Western tales. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Comment below with your location. "Why'd you do it?" Clara asked as she finished the bandaging. "Back in the saloon. You didn't know me." James looked at the stars, his grey eyes distant. "Had a younger brother once. Daniel. He stood up to the wrong men, tried to protect our land from the railroad. They hanged him while I was laid up with a bullet in my back." His voice went hollow. "Been running ever since. Figured maybe it was time to stand instead." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I'll leave at first light." Take the horse. They're hunting me, not you." "Too late for that," James said, closing his eyes. "Already bled for you. Might as well see it through." In the distance they heard it, the sound of hunting dogs baying. Dawn broke, cold and merciless. James could barely stand, fever burning through him, but he forced himself upright. Clara had already saddled the horse, her face set with grim determination. "There's a trapper I know," James rasped, his throat raw. "Name's Ezekiel Cole. Lives in the high country, 3 days north. He can get you to Fort Prescott through the back trails." "3 days?" Clara's voice cracked. "You can't ride 3 hours in your condition." "Then I'll ride 2 and walk 1. His jaw set with stubborn pride. "Get mounted." They climbed into badlands that rose toward distant peaks. The summer heat was brutal, baking the red rock until it shimmered. James swayed in the saddle, Clara's arms the only thing keeping him upright. She could feel him burning with fever, his back rigid with pain. By noon, they had to stop. James slid from the horse more than dismounted, and Clara dragged him into the shade of an overhang. She wet a cloth with their dwindling water and placed it on his forehead. "You're dying because of me," she whispered, tears tracking through the dust on her face. "Not dead yet." His eyes opened, clear despite the fever. "That ledger, is it worth dying for?" Clara pulled the oilcloth-wrapped book from her bodice. "There are 12 girls named in here, 12 families swindled, 4 men murdered." Her voice hardened. "If I die without getting this to the law, those 12 girls stay in Cain's hell forever." James studied her, really saw her, not the frightened rabbit from the saloon, but a woman forged in fire, carrying more courage than most men he'd known. "Then we ride," he said, struggling up. "But first, tell me about you, your real story. If I'm dying for a stranger, least I can know her name." As Clara began to speak, telling him of Missouri and her mother's garden and the uncle's betrayal, neither heard the soft scrape of boot on stone above them. Pike had found their trail. The rifle shot cracked like lightning, spraying rock splinters across Clara's face. She screamed, and James, moving purely on instinct, threw her behind a boulder as 2 more shots rang out. "Thought you could outrun Luther Kane's money," Pike's voice echoed from the rocks above. "Got half the territory hunting you now. $500 for the girl, dead or alive." James had his rifle out, scanning the high ground. He counted 3 muzzle flashes. Bad odds. His wounded side screamed as he shifted position, fresh blood darkening his shirt. "Clara," he whispered urgently, "there's a canyon cut, 50 yards north. When I start shooting, you run for it." "I'm not leaving you to." "That's an order." His voice cracked with command. "Get that ledger to Fort Prescott. Make this worth something." Before she could argue, James broke cover, firing as he moved. His first shot caught a bounty hunter in the shoulder, sending the man tumbling from his perch. Return fire chewed the ground at his feet. Clara ran, her heart tearing itself apart. She heard James's rifle bark again, heard him shout in pain, heard the sickening thud of a body falling. Then, silence. She stopped, her whole body shaking. Every instinct screamed at her to keep running, to survive. But she looked at the canyon ahead, looked back at the rocks where James had made his stand, and made a choice that terrified her. She turned back. Moving silent as a ghost, Clara crept through the boulders. She found James first, alive, but barely, blood pumping from a fresh wound in his thigh, his rifle empty beside him. Pike stood over him, pistol raised. "Any last words, hero?" Clara's hand closed around a fist-sized rock. She rose from behind Pike and brought it down with all her strength, catching him behind the ear. He dropped like a slaughtered bull. "Yes," she panted, staring at Pike's unconscious form. "Mine." Then she saw the other 2 bounty hunters coming around the rocks, guns drawn. Clara grabbed James under the arms and dragged him with desperate strength, her slight frame somehow finding power in pure terror. 20 feet, 30. Behind them, the bounty hunters shouted, closing fast. Then James, half conscious, groaned. Cave. Left. She saw it, a narrow opening in the rock face, barely visible in the shadows. Clara pulled James inside, just as bullets sparked off stone where they'd been seconds before. The cave was deeper than it looked, a natural formation that twisted back into darkness. Clara dragged James around a bend, into a chamber where the summer light couldn't reach. She could hear the men outside arguing. They're trapped. Just smoke 'em out. No fire. Luther wants that book intact. And the girl, he wants her alive to make an example of. Clara's hands shook as she checked James's wounds. The thigh wound was bad, the bullet still lodged in muscle. His fever had spiked to dangerous levels. In the darkness, she could barely see his face. "James," she whispered, cradling his head. "Stay with me, please." His eyes opened, unfocused. "Clara, run," while they're watching the entrance. "There's no back way out." Then I'm sorry." His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "Sorry, I couldn't get you there." "Stop talking like you're dying." She was crying now, tears hot on her cheeks. "You don't have permission to die. You hear me? I don't give you permission." James's cracked lips curved in something like a smile. Bossy, for a barmaid. Outside, she heard the men gathering wood, smelled smoke beginning to drift into the cave. They were going to suffocate them out. Clara looked at James's pistol, still holstered at his hip. She'd never fired a gun in her life. But she reached for it anyway, her hand closing around the worn grip. "What are you doing?" James whispered. "Making a choice," Clara said. She checked the cylinder, 3 bullets left. "Teaching Luther Kane that some property fights back." She stood, pistol trembling in her hands, and walked toward the cave entrance, where smoke was beginning to billow. Clara emerged from the smoke like an avenging angel, pistol raised, her eyes streaming tears, but her hands steady. The 2 bounty hunters turned, surprised, and that moment of hesitation saved her life. "Drop your guns," she commanded, her voice stronger than she felt. One man laughed. "Little girl, you don't even know how to—" Clara fired. The shot went wide, but close enough that both men dove for cover. She fired again, backing toward a cluster of rocks, using the terrain the way she'd seen James do. Then, a new sound. Hoofbeats. Many horses, coming fast. The bounty hunters froze. Clara's heart sank. More of Kane's men. But the riders wore blue uniforms, and the man in the lead had a silver star pinned to his chest. "Federal Marshal Bennett," he called out. "Drop your weapons, all of you!" 10 soldiers fanned out, rifles ready. The bounty hunters surrendered immediately, hands high. Clara lowered her pistol, legs shaking so badly she nearly collapsed. Marshal Bennett dismounted, his weathered face grim. "Somebody want to tell me what's happening here?" "James Thornton," Clara gasped. "In the cave. He's wounded. Please." "We're so grateful you've stayed with Clara and James through this harrowing journey. If you're as invested in their survival as we are, please hit like and subscribe for more tales from the frontier. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your engagement means everything." The marshal sent men into the cave. They brought James out on a stretcher, his face grey, but his eyes open. When he saw Clara alive, something like peace crossed his features. "The girl," one soldier said to Bennett, "she matches the description. There's a bounty." "Issued by Luther Kane," Clara interrupted, pulling the ledger from her dress. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice rang clear. "And this is why. Every crime he's committed for the last 5 years, every girl he bought, every man he murdered, all in his own handwriting." Marshal Bennett took the book, his expression darkening as he flipped through pages. "We've been investigating Kane for months, but he owns every local lawman from here to—" "Not anymore," Clara said. "That's his confession, written proof." The marshal looked at her, this small, battered young woman who'd fought her way through hell. Then he looked at James, bleeding and barely conscious, but watching Clara with something like pride. "Get that man medical attention," Bennett ordered. "And miss, we're riding to Fort Prescott. I think you better come with us." As soldiers lifted James onto a horse, Clara moved to his side. Fort Prescott rose from the high desert like a promise of civilization, its wooden walls and American flag a stark contrast to the lawless territories they'd crossed. Clara rode beside James's stretcher, her hand never leaving his. The fort surgeon worked through the night. Clara sat outside the infirmary, the ledger clutched to her chest, refusing to move even when soldiers offered her food and rest. At dawn, Marshal Bennett emerged from the commander's office, his face grave. "Miss Brennan, the commander wants to see you." Clara's heart sank. Had Kane's influence reached even here? But in the commander's office sat a different kind of power, a federal judge, grey-haired and sharp-eyed, who'd been riding circuit when Bennett's message reached him. "Miss Brennan," Judge Harrington said, "I've reviewed this ledger. If even half of what's written here is true, Luther Kane will hang." He paused. "But I need testimony. Yours. In open court. Are you prepared for that?" Clara thought of the brand on her shoulder, of standing in front of a room full of strangers and showing them Kane's mark. She thought of the other girls still trapped on his ranch. She thought of James, fighting for his life in the next building. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'll testify." You're witnessing history unfold in the Wild West. If you're enjoying this tale of justice and redemption, show your support with a like and subscribe. We love building this community. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The trial took 3 days. Clara testified for 5 hours, her voice never wavering even when Kane's lawyer tried to destroy her character. When she showed the brand to the courtroom, women wept and men looked away in shame. 12 girls were freed from Kane's ranch. 7 families got their stolen land back. Luther Kane was sentenced to hang. But Clara barely noticed the verdict. She sat beside James's bed, where fever still held him in its grip. The surgeon had removed the bullets, sewed up the wounds, but infection was the real enemy now. "If he makes it through tonight," the doctor said quietly, "he'll live." Clara took James's burning hand in both of hers. "Then we're staying awake," she whispered to him. "Both of us. You don't leave me now, James Thornton. Not after everything." As midnight approached, James's fever broke. 6 weeks later, Clara stood in the land office at Fort Prescott, a bank draft in her hands. The reward money for Kane's capture, combined with compensation for the girls he'd victimized, had made her wealthy by frontier standards. "This valley here," she told the clerk, pointing to a map of high country north of the fort. "How much for 160 acres?" James sat in a chair by the window, still healing but stronger now. His grey eyes watched her with quiet amazement. "Clara, you don't have to." "I want to." She turned to him, her violet eyes fierce. "You lost your land because you stood up to evil men. I gained mine because you stood up for me. Seems fair we should share it." The clerk looked between them, confused. "Are you married?" Clara and James exchanged glances. They hadn't spoken of it directly, but something had been building between them through the long nights of his recovery. Something deeper than gratitude, stronger than simple attraction. "Not yet," James said slowly, standing despite the protest from his healing wounds. He crossed to Clara, taking her hands in his scarred ones. "But if the lady would consider a half-dead cowboy with more scars than sense—" "I've got my own scars," Clara interrupted, her hand unconsciously moving to her shoulder. "Seems we match." "Then I'm asking proper." James dropped to one knee, wincing but determined. "Clara Brennan, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me in that valley, where no one owns anyone, and we're just free?" Clara pulled him to his feet, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, yes, you stubborn fool, but on one condition." "Name it." "You never, ever pretend to own me." Her smile was brilliant, transforming her face. "What we have is real. Partnership. Equal say in everything." "Deal," James said, and kissed her. 3 months later, in the high valley where aspen trees turned gold in the autumn sun, they built their cabin. Clara planted a garden, using seeds from her mother's old recipes. James raised horses, good, honest stock. The silver comb that an old Apache trader had given Clara in gratitude for testifying against Cain sat on their simple mantle, catching the firelight. 5 years passed like water over stone, gentle but transformative. The cabin grew, an added room, a barn, corrals for the growing herd. Clara and James's reputation spread through the territories. Honest horse traders who gave fair deals and took in strays, both human and animal. On a summer evening in 1835, Clara stood on their porch, her hand resting on her rounded belly. She was 6 months along with their second child. Their daughter Emma, 4 years old with her mother's violet eyes and her father's steady temperament, played in the yard. James rode up from the south pasture, and Clara's heart still jumped at the sight of him. His grey eyes found hers immediately, and his weathered face split into a smile. "Letter came from Fort Prescott," he called, swinging down from his horse. "From Marshal Bennett." Clara took the letter, reading quickly. Her eyes widened. "They want me to speak at a women's conference about property rights," and she touched her shoulder where Cain's brand was now just a faded white scar, barely visible. "About surviving." "Will you go?" James asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands settling over their unborn child. Clara leaned back against him, looking at the valley that was theirs, at Emma laughing as she chased a butterfly, at the life they'd built from ashes and blood and desperate courage. "I'll go," she said, "because 12 girls got free, but there are hundreds more out there. Someone has to speak for them." James kissed her temple. "Then I'll ride with you, like always." Thank you for joining us on Clara and James's incredible journey from desperate survival to hard-won freedom. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more authentic tales from the American frontier. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Clara and James stood together on their porch, free, equal, home.